So a very warm welcome to today's edition of our learning tutorial. I'm Patijana Kambuache, JK of JK Clothing. Today we're going to learn about the basic bodice for our male shirt. A lot of us can sew for women, but then we find the male garment a bit tricky. My aim today is to demystify this notion and make you know how easy the process is. It doesn't really matter if you are a beginner or a pro. Stick and stay for the next 15 minutes. Let's do this. By drafting the basic bodice for the man, we would need the following measurement. The back measurement or the shoulder to shoulder measurement. In this instance, it is 17 and a half. Across back, 16 and a half. Across chest, 15 and a half. Chest circumference, 42. Tummy, 38. Bicep or around arm, 13. Length, 30. Shoulder to the tummy or shoulder to waist, 18. So these are the measurements we would use for the basic bodice. We'll first start by drafting a line perpendicular to this center back line because we are drafting the back pattern first. Next, we'll divide our shoulder to shoulder or the back measurement into two. Our back measurement is 17 and a half. Divided by 2 gives us 8 and 3/4 plus our seam allowance. My seam allowance is quarter, so I'll add quarter to 8 and 3/4 to make it 9 inches. If your seam allowance for inserting the sleeve is half, you can as well add half to your shoulder to shoulder measurement divided by 2. Shoulder slope is 2 inches. We'll mark 2 inches from this point downwards. Next, neck width. The neck width is measured from this point towards this line on the starting line. It is 6 inches. Divided by 2 gives us 3 inches. This is standard. Next, we draw a line to join the neck width to the shoulder slope point. Arm depth. To determine the arm depth, we'll divide the around arm measurement or the bicep into 2. And then we add 1 inch ease to it. You can decide to add half of an inch as your ease. It all depends on you or the client. Our bicep is 13. Divided by 2 gives us 6 and a half. Plus 1 inch ease gives us 7 and a half. This then becomes our chest line. We will divide our chest measurement into 4. Our chest is 42. Divided into 4 gives us 10 and a half. We'll add our seam allowance of 1 inch. Next, we want to be able to mark our armhole. To do that, we first need to divide our arm depth measurement into 3, and then we move from the chest line upwards by that measurement. And so the arm depth is 7 and a half. Divided by 3 gives us 2 and a half. Since we are drafting the back measurement, we would divide our across back measurement into 2, plus the same seam allowance we added at the back here, or the shoulder to shoulder measurement. 16 and a half divided by 2 gives us 8 and a quarter, plus quarter of an inch, 8 and a half. We'll mark this on this very line. With the help of a French curve, we are to join the chest measurement divided by 4 to the shoulder slope point, passing through the across back measurement we marked here. Please, if you have not subscribed to our channel, please do so to encourage us to do more of such educative content for you. Thank you. The next step is to mark the shirt length and the shoulder to waist line. The shoulder to waist is 18 plus the seam allowance that we would use in joining the two shoulders of the front and the back pattern. In my instance, it is 1/4 of an inch. I'll add the 1/4 of an inch to the 18 to make it 18 and 1/4. Next is the shirt length, which is 30 plus 1/4, 30 and 1/4. At this point, we would locate the next point, which is the shoulder to the hip. We did not measure this, but that would be 6 inches below the waistline. This serves as the hip line, and so we would divide our waist into 4 plus seam allowance, our chest measurement into 4 plus seam allowance. We'll bring the same measurement to the hemline, unless of course the person's chest measurement is smaller than the hips. For most men, the hip measurement and the chest measurement are almost always the same. But if it is different, then on this hip line, you should divide the hip by 4 plus your seam allowance. The waist is 38. Divided by 4 gives us 9.5. Plus 1 inch seam allowance. The hip is same as the chest, meaning 42. Divided by 4 gives us 10.5 plus 1 inch seam. Ten and a half, 1 inch seam allowance. We will then add our 2 inch hem allowance to it. Next point would be to join this to that is the waist, to the hip and to the hem line. Bear in mind, we only do this when you want to taper the waist a little bit. For the elderly or anybody who would want the shirt to be loose, we would join the chest line to the hip line and to the hem line straight without having to curve it in or to taper it at the waistline. This is when you want the waist to be a little bit smaller than that of the chest. For our neck hole, we would measure 3/4 of an inch from the starting line downwards. This is because my seam allowance for the shoulder is 1/4 of an inch. If your seam allowance for the shoulder is 1/2 of an inch, please do 1 inch instead of the 3/4. Okay, so the next step is to draw our neck hole. We'll go ahead and cut this and move on to draw our front pattern. To draft the back pattern, you need to place the front pattern on another brown paper, making sure that the center front of the front pattern and then the center back all align on the same line. Next, we will cut the front pattern just the same way as we cut the back pattern. And so we are cutting all around the back pattern to have 2 pieces of the back pattern. We will then create notches at the various joints. The difference between the front and the back pattern would be the front neckline, that is the neck hole, and then the across chest and the across back measurement. With the across back, the measurement was 16.5. With the across chest, the measurement is 15.5, which means we would have to taper in a little bit at where the across chest line should be. And so as we did for the back, where we divided the arm depth into 3 and then moved from the chest line upwards by that measurement, we'll do the same thing for the front. The arm depth measurement is 7.5 divided by 3 gives us 2.5. Across chest measurement is 15.5 divided by 2 gives us 7.75. We will then add the 1/4 inch seam allowance, which we added to the back, which was going to help us to fix our sleeves, that is to set in our sleeve. And so we add the 1/4 to this measurement so that when we set in our sleeve, it doesn't fall short here. With this done, we would make sure that we refine our front armhole curve where it now touches the across chest here, making it a bit smaller than that of the across back. Next would be to extend the neck depth. Initially we did 3/4 inch for the back. So for the front, we would add 3.25 to it, making it 4 inches in all. Bear in mind, this measurement is for a start. It is not always constant. Next, we would measure the distance from here all the way to the neck width. We get 6 inches. We need to measure that of the back pattern. Here we get 3.5. When we add the 3.5 to the 6 inches, we get 9.5. We don't forget the fact that we would as well be stitching the shoulders, that is the front and the back shoulders together, and that would reduce the 9.5 to 9 inches because we'll be sewing 1/4 from the front, 1/4 from the back, and so a total of 9 inches is what we are getting. Times 2 gives us 18, and 18 is appropriate for my neck hole. And so we'll go ahead and cut the front neck hole. If this 18 inches is big for the client, what you do is that you reduce the neck depth by about 1/4, and then you reconstruct this arc. You measure to make sure that it fits the client's neck hole perfectly well. We can go ahead and cut our neck hole. So this is our front and then our back pattern, the basic bodice for the male. If you want to learn how to construct the sleeve, that is the basic sleeve for this shirt, we have already done a video on this and it's also on our page. I'll share the link on the screen as you see here, which you can click and then watch it as well. It is the same as that sleeve which we'll do for a female. That is a basic sleeve slipper, can be used for a female and for a male. The same method, the same principle. It's only the measurements that would change. And so this is it.